Welcome everyone to Masculinity in Conversation. I'm Kanoa, I use he and they pronouns. And I'm here with Jay Thomas, who I'm really excited to talk to. Jay is a local drag king and performer in town, and just has some really brilliant things to say about masculinity. I think it's really important for you to be here, to be joining us today. So I want to start off by asking, who are you? Can you tell us a little bit more about like who you are and the identities that you hold that are important for us to know about?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you for having me, first of all. My name is Jay. My pronouns are they and them. I'm a drag king, as you mentioned. A lot of the identities that I feel like are important for me to express are I'm Latina, I'm also trans, and I also identify as a lesbian, which is something that's like really important to me in my art and my everyday too. Yeah, with my community and things like that.
Well, it's great to just like have you here for the conversation, and in a little bit of our pre-interview prep, it was I had an inkling that as a drag king performer with living at the intersection of so many complicating identities, that you'd have a lot of really interesting things to say about masculinity, and so I'm really excited for you to just let us pick your brain a little bit about that. So can I ask you how you started doing drag in the first place? Like, how did you arrive to even starting to do drag?
Yeah, I think that I always wanted to perform in some capacity. And then there was a call out from the Boys of Austin, which is a drag king troupe here in Austin, Texas, for auditions. And they had a live audition. So you basically had to create your own look, your own performance, and then do it in front of them and in front of the performers that were from the Boys of Austin, but then other folks that were also auditioning.
Wow.
So that was my very first time on stage. And it was incredibly nerve-wracking, but it was also a really good way to start because everyone was new, everyone was nervous, everyone kind of didn't really know what they were doing. So once I hit the stage, I invited all of my friends, so it looked like it felt like I had fans. And so it gave me this illusion that I think gave me a lot of confidence in that very first moment. And so I like to always attribute it to that, because after that, I just kept getting booked by folks. I think they saw me perform, they saw the energy, and the crowd interaction, which was like all of my friends. But
friends are good for that.
Right, 100%. Yeah, if they could have signs up, they would have too. But it was a good time. And then after that, folks, just like drag artists or from around the city, kept reaching out to me and asking me even to produce shows and MC shows. So I just went from there and just kept doing it.
Yeah. Do you remember the song that you performed?
Yeah, that very first song was, they had a theme. The theme was anarchy.
Okay.
And so I naturally always gravitate towards Spanish music, and so I did Maná.
Oh,
Me
nice.
Vale.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a song, literally, I mean, it translates to I don't give a fuck. So the song was perfect, and it was a really like natural performance for me.
Yeah. I'm curious, like, considering, because I feel like they're in choosing a Spanish language song, you're probably choosing to do a couple of things, right? You're choosing to center folks who speak Spanish and can understand the language, and then you're also not catering to folks who don't understand the lyrics. I'm curious, like, how do you convey the meaning to folks who don't speak Spanish? Like, what is the intentional choice behind choosing Spanish language songs?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has to do with just growing up listening to this music. For me, it's nostalgia. And so I think it naturally comes out of me, like this expression, like facial expressions and the things that I bring. Like, for instance, in that performance, I brought a lesbian flag and a trans flag at the same time. So even if folks don't understand the language, I feel like there's a way to see it in my expressions and the things that I bring on the performance. And then also, I've been in Austin for a while now, for about 16 years now, and a lot of that was me being in primarily white-dominated spaces. And so for me, it was a very intentional decision to know that I can reach folks like me who felt out of place and who could see themselves on stage and feel like they belong there. So it was a really important decision for me to make to kind of navigate those spaces and be very intentional about choosing Spanish language songs so that folks can feel seen.
Wow, that's really powerful. Yeah, you sort of decided to make the art that you felt like you were missing or wanted to see in Austin.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Wow. Well, what was the pull to drag, and like what keeps you in drag?
There's a lot of things going on at once with drag. It's a very messy and beautiful art form. And also within me, I think there's a lot of nuances to all of our identities, right? But I didn't quite have a way to express that for a really long time. So I come from a background of like never being able to express myself creatively. I was in a corporate environment for over 10 years, and this was pre-transition. So I did a lot of masking myself and in some ways already performing, but in ways I didn't want to perform. So when I found drag, I realized it was a really good way for me to perform in ways that were fun for me, and in ways to put on a mask that was exciting and that allowed me to express like my gender identity, even just to bring fun to folks, like just to have a good time.
You're like, if I'm gonna mask, I'm gonna mask on my terms.
Literally that. Yeah, 100%. Like once I went through my journey of realizing I was trans, which drag helped me in as well. It helped me kind of have that push. Once I did that, I was like, okay, this is what it feels like to be able to express myself in front of people. And it's a very vulnerable thing to do. I've always been a very vulnerable person in conversation with my friends and things like that, but I've never done it in front of strangers. So it's been a very powerful way to express myself creatively, and then also to expand the folks in my community, because as a queer person, sometimes, especially in South Texas, it's not always easy to find folks that are like you, that are queer, that have the same ideals as you. And I found that drag has a lot of folks that I share a lot of my lived experiences with and values with. So it's helped me kind of expand my community in that way. So it's just been easy to kind of stay with it, because I'm like, this feels very natural for me.
Yeah, I love that there's a lot of alignment between the types of people that you want to hang out with and the types of people that you want to perform with, it sounds like.
Right.
There's like a shared grounding sort of like framework that you're using, probably to think about gender, to think about the way that we perform gender, both when we're on a stage and when we're off of it as well.
Yeah, and specifically in the drag king community, I find I've just found beautiful people because it's just like inherent to the art form. To I think a lot of us have the same intention in our art, and so it's just easy to find really great folks in that.
This is not what we talked about, but the drag to trans pipeline.
Oh, it's heavy.
Feels like something I hear a lot of folks like talk about, that like there's something about drag that is a pipeline, that is sort of like this gateway drug to discovering parts of yourself that you didn't know were there, or giving space for yourself for parts of yourself that you didn't know were there. I'm curious, like, what is it about drag that makes space for those things that are harder to make space for outside of drag?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I said, for me, it just feels so it's this art form where like you can perform in whatever ways you want. You could do whatever the fuck you want. There's literally no blueprint specifically for drag kings because there's not a lot of representation. And so when I started, I had to like, there's like 2 videos on how to do drag king makeup. There's, you know, we don't have the RuPaul of it all. And so I think it's such a push of boundaries to do drag. I feel like there's ways in which we go to, I don't know if you remember the first time you ever went to a gay bar or things like where you're like, whoa, like this feels right, and it also feels like people are pushing so many boundaries here. Where do I fall in that? And you kind of feel like a normie. That's what it is. Like, so when I started drag, I was like, I was so used to being in cis het environments where I was just like the token lesbian, and I was like the lesbian that made people comfortable because I was masked. My girlfriends were always high femme, and we hung out with nothing but cis het folks. And when I started realizing my identity, my transness, being non-binary, even coming out and saying, hey, I go by this name was so hard for me. Pronouns, I for a long time was like, you can still use she, it's fine, and like it hurt so bad, but the comfort of making people feel okay around me was like my priority. And then once I started drag and I see people do like crazy shit, say crazy shit, crazy makeup, like you just, especially subversive drag artists like drag things, drag kings, they just push so many boundaries that by the time you get into that, you're just like, oh, that's stupid. Like that's dumb performance. This is fun performance.
Oh, gotcha.
So it just it allowed me to, and I think that maybe why there's a there's this big pipeline because we're just like, oh, okay, like we've always felt these things, but now that you're pushing it so much and you're being so silly about it, it's like, okay, in my real life, I also want to be this free because it feels good. And once you feel that good, there's just no going back.
Yeah. I love that. There's something that is like unlocked, and I think that you're right about this like point of no return. Kind of once you taste freedom, it's hard to imagine a life without it. So we haven't really talked about exactly about how your masculinity sort of like comes into play when it comes to drag, and I'm curious if there's anything about your masculinity in particular that drag has helped either complicate or clarify for you.
Yeah, it's done both of those things.
Yeah.
But because I think that always happens when you explore, right? There's always going to be, like, it's never going to just be a linear process where you're like, oh, now I'm this and now I'm that. It's like, whoa, it's opening up so many doors, and also what feels comfortable to me. So doing drag, I initially I think that the way I've gotten more comfortable with it is that I go really hard on my like masculine persona. So when I'm in drag, I'm like, I'm a man. That's a he, him right there. Like 100%. Like, and it's silly too because I actively will put on facial hair and things like that. That's like eyeliner. It's like so obviously not real that it's drag. It's camp. And so I've leaned in so heavily on my masculinity with drag that it's allowed me to explore my femininity. Like I realized that I wanted to do things like perform pop hits, perform like girly pop stuff, which I never imagined. And I actually even remember when I was growing up, I actively pretended like I didn't like pop music. And I didn't know that until like now, where I'm like, you know, with all these drag queens who are listening to like Charlie XCX and now Chappell Roan and stuff like that, and I'm like, this is so good. Like I kind of want to like dance this. And I'm like, oh, I realized that back then I just was trying so hard to overcompensate my masculinity that I wasn't able to explore my femininity in a way that felt comfortable.
Yeah, maybe something about liking like girl pop felt dangerous or maybe untenable, uncertain for you.
Like they'll find me out.
Oh,
which is wild because like the whole world saw me as a girl, but I didn't, and so I was like, no, they must not know. But sure. It's just allowed me to like play with it in a way that feels more like low stakes. It feels easier for me.
That, I mean, to hear you say low stakes to describe getting on stage and performing in front of a bunch of people, that sounds wild to me. It sounds like the exact opposite of what I would think drag is.
Yeah, I mean, it's drag is playful, drag is fun. To me, getting up there, I feel like I have this armor because I am in this persona, and it feels like I'm just there to have a good time, versus in the real world. I had a hard time for a long time even looking people in the eye in the real world.
Oh my gosh,
in like
whoa.
having conversations with folks, a lot of the things, a lot of the communication I had with people, just like one-to-one, also because I didn't know myself that well, I felt very reserved, I felt very small, and it felt very like every single interaction was high stakes for me because I wanted them to like me so bad, because I didn't like me. And now with drag, I'm just like, well, I know me now, and I get to just have fun and see if I like this thing that I'm about to do. And if I don't like it, people are smiling, people are having a good time. They don't, like, they know, especially like the folks that love me, know that it's me exploring, and just love that about the fact that I'm doing that. So it feels in that way very low stakes because I can't do anything wrong.
It sounds like there is maybe an iterative nature to performance that feels really good for you, where there is sort of like this impermanence about it, where you're like, this is just what I'm doing tonight. You know what I mean? Like, it could change tomorrow, it could change in 5 minutes, and it doesn't change the core of who I am or what I know about myself. And I'll always get the chance to do something a little bit differently next time if I want to.
100%. It feels so easy to go in and out of whatever I'm doing because, I mean, it's also literal, right? Like I'm putting on makeup and then I just take it off, and it's like a completely different person. So in a lot of ways, I think that in our real life, I think we're very caught up, or also just like we feel like if we say we're this one thing, then we have to be that for the rest of our lives, because society already doesn't believe queer people when we tell them what we are. And I think going back to my lesbian identity, I think that's why it's really important to me, because for a long time I felt like I needed to do certain things and be a certain way to prove that I was a lesbian, because you get all these messages of people being like, oh, but you're a lesbian, but it's because of this, or it's because of, like, it doesn't actually exist, you don't know who you are, we know who you are, and one day you're gonna show it. And so with drag, it's like there's not, like you said, it's so impermanent. There's nothing set on it, that I get to just be like, this is silly, this is fun, I do what I want.
I love that. I love like your returning to like the silliness of drag and of performance, and it sounds like there's just like a direct correlation between the silliness and the boundary pushing in drag, and the silliness and the boundary pushing in the other ways that you express your gender, your gender identity. Are there other identities that drag has helped sort of bring into focus as you've performed?
Yeah, I think because of my intentionality with choosing songs that I grew up with, Spanish songs, it's helped me really explore my Latina identity. I mean, even down to my name, my drag name is Bobby Pudrido, which is like an ode to a Tejano artist that I grew up with. Cool. And then also my trans identity, I incorporate that in a lot of my performance, whether it's something I write on myself, whether it's I'm performing a song by a trans person, or helping produce shows that are an all trans cast. And then also my lesbian identity, I have a lot of shows that I produce specifically for sapphic, lesbians, dykes, whatever folks want to or identify with. And drag has helped me be able to create those spaces, because folks saw me perform, so I don't know, there's something powerful about being on stage. There's something that people see you and they're like, oh, this person has something to say. And so because I did that, folks will come up to me and be like, do you want to produce a show? Do you want to do this? And I'm immediately thinking about my people, thinking about my identities, thinking about the ways in which all of these identities have been erased as I was growing up and as I was trying to be in community with queer folks. So it's given me that power to be able to like kind of give back and be like, okay, let's make this niche, let's make this catered to either trans folks or Latina folks or lesbians or all three.
Yeah, for sure. I love that, you know, people are seeing you as like a culture maker and someone who facilitates the creation of new cultural like traditions in queer community, in performance, in Austin. And I love also that you're really thinking about your connection to dyke history, to, you know, lesbian identity. I think so much, you know, as like a transmasculine person, I think sometimes it's easy to get discouraged when you look for evidence in like transmasculine like lineages that like we've always been here, right? And I think so much of transmasculine like history is also in dyke history, is also in, you know, the folks who were at the forefront of the movement but like didn't get the credit for that work. And I think there's also this like tension, right? Because you know, speaking for myself, I want to be really mindful about like the identities that I claim and the space that I take up, but at the same time I want to feel connected to people who I consider to be part of my lineage. And so I love that you are taking this very like thoughtful approach to thinking about who your people are and how you're bringing them with you in your performance. That's really powerful.
That's a great way of putting it. To be honest with you, I mean, I've always identified as a lesbian. I came out when I was 15. I'm 34 now. So it's literally like I've been out for such a long time that is my culture, my people, who I grew up with. And so it has been the way in which I integrated myself into the community. But even then, as soon as I started transitioning, I immediately felt like I was grieving this part of me. And I felt like I didn't have anyone to be able to tell me like this identity of lesbian is also political. And I think a lot of folks miss that, and it's easy to, right? Because I know that there's, you know, lesbian spaces where it's common for folks to not claim or welcome transmasc folks because they immediately see them as cis or as whatever threatening thing that they think masculinity is.
I mean, I have a hard time entering most like sapphic like centered spaces, for that reason, which I get, right? Like I really understand like that self-protective sort of like knee-jerk reaction. And it does, there is grief there because I'm like, you don't know nothing about me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
100%.
Like, we're also like making a lot of assumptions about each other.
100%. It's the same assumptions we're trying to get people to not do for like about us, and yet we do it so quickly. So I think that's why it's important for me to create those spaces and get on the mic and be like, I'm a dyke. Because if it does feel a certain way to someone, and it's so interesting to transition, honestly, because I never know what people see me as. So I wonder if I'm up there, especially when I'm in drag, like full man, I just wonder if they're offended or if they're like, who is this dude talking about dyke? But I want them to wonder, and I want them to come up, and then I want them to see the spaces that I create where sometimes I am the only transmasc person, or maybe there's 2 or 3 folks there. But it's important for them to know that because, like you said, dyke history is trans history. A lot of our ancestors, queer ancestors, didn't have the language of trans. And so they said, I'm a lesbian. And the whole time they were trans as hell. And I don't know if you've, have you heard of Leslie Feinberg?
Yes, yeah.
When I read Stone Butch Blues, that is like, honestly, like it changed a lot of the way I saw things because I was like, here's this person that actively identifies as a lesbian, as butch, and is talking about the complexity of it and how sometimes you feel like you don't belong, and this is why you feel like you don't belong. Even in the feminist movement, you know, lesbians weren't allowed or weren't embraced and things like that. So seeing, I think, history of it reminds me that it's okay for me to identify as a lesbian still, because it's political for me. And if it changes at some point, then it fucking changes. But as it stands right now, that's what I am. And I want to be able to be proud of that, so that folks can maybe in some ways, I don't know, think about how they're judging or making assumptions about people, whether it's a trans masc person, a trans femme person. You know, there's trans women who are lesbians too. That it's just all of this erasure that I think is important to like be loud about.
Yes. Speaking of your drag performances, I want to know, like, do you have any favorite performances to date, or any like bucket list performances that you're hoping to knock out?
Yeah, one, I think, well, there's a crowd favorite that I love to do because it's easy for me, because I know the crowd will go crazy. And it's,
you gotta have those.
Yeah. Like, it's like the low hanging fruit.
Yes.
But it's a good time because everyone, you know, is super excited about the music. I did it first New Year's Eve at Cheer Up Charlie's, and it's a mix of 3 Spanish songs. It's Cheyenne, Tiempo de Vals, and then it's into El Disgusto, which is like very accordion heavy, and then into Gasolina by Daddy Yankee. So the crowd goes wild.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Like, everyone knows that, right? Like, it's like if there's a song in Spanish that I feel like everyone will be able to be like, I know what's happening here.
It's a great, low hanging fruit. And Tiempo de Vals is like the quinceañera song. Most folks know of it for the chambelanes and the like court, like choreographed dances. So it probably means something like very special for you to do that as like a drag king, right? Sort of like reclaiming that sort of like crooner, sort of Casanova kind of identity in that.
100%. And I didn't have a quinceañera because I didn't want to dress.
Okay.
So so it's very like it hits deep.
For sure. Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
If somebody asked you to perform at their quinceañera as Papi Podrido, would you?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, a dream.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time. I would go. I'm curious, you know, what do you think is important or urgent for transmasculine folks to know? Like, what would you have wanted to know prior to transitioning?
Like I said, it's a trip to be trans because you never know how people are perceiving you, right? Like, you have this version of yourself that you assume everyone sees pre-transition. Even if you don't medically transition, even if you don't socially transition, you always know who you are. But the world sees you differently. And so as I started being on hormones and getting top surgery, I started realizing that there's a difference in the way that people approach me, and the way I communicate is taken, and how people receive it. There's a power dynamic that I think that shifts, and what's hard about it is that it's not a black and white shift. It won't go like, you're this and now you're man. It depends on who you're talking to. It depends on the context. But I am very careful and have been mindful, because of friends who are transmasculine who have told me this, of not doing things like mansplaining. And to be honest with you personally, because once I started testosterone, my voice started lowering, and I started loving the sound of my voice, which is dangerous for masculine people. And so sometimes I'm like, especially like with my femme friends, I'm like, tell me if I'm like being that guy. And even in dating, it's also like women will see you differently. People you date will see you differently if they don't know you. There's this inherent danger to masculinity that people are used to, that they may be perceiving you as that. So the way that I used to go up to people is different. There's this like creepy factor
Yeah.
that you have to take into account.
Absolutely.
Because the way they like you said, you don't know anything about me, and so the power dynamics are just so different, that I think it's really important to keep that in mind, as a specifically transmasculine person, because you also get privilege from that. You know, more people hear you out.
Yeah.
People interrupt you less, and I think it's important for us to be able to remember that and take a pause and make space for the folks who aren't being heard, because that was us at some point.
I was just like thinking about, you know, the role of dysphoria for trans folks, and thinking about the kinds of bodies that we usually see on stages, right? And I'm thinking about, you know, the way that a lot of like drag queens like feminize their bodies by accentuating certain parts and minimizing other parts, right? I'm thinking about like the impossibly unattainable standards of male beauty, and how you have like navigated that as a person with a body, you know, and putting that body on stage, maybe sometimes with like very little clothing on, like, and just sort of like subjecting yourself to, you know, the gaze of your audience, while also trying to, in some ways, like make a mockery, a loving mockery of masculinity, right?
Right.
I'm curious, like, what has that been like for you?
It's a difficult process. As you mentioned, drag queens. I think that there's a lot of reasons why there's a lot more visibility for drag queens, but one of them does have to do with our bodies. A lot of drag kings are transmasculine folks, or lesbians, are folks that are small. And that was a big part of my gender dysphoria for a long time. You can't recreate, you can't change your height.
Right.
So it's there, like, you actively take up less physical space than most drag queens. So in some ways it could be an even more difficult thing. I keep thinking about this trans pipeline where I'm like, why do we keep subjecting ourselves? But if it's that much harder, because you will see a drag queen go up, and I booked a friend who has a drag queen and a drag king persona.
Oh, cool.
And I watched her perform as a drag queen, and then the next number she did was as a drag king. And the stark difference of the way people received her was insane. Like, I was like, okay, I could see like this happening just in front of my eyes. Drag kings just get less tips, less clapping, less just crowd engagement. And a lot of it has to do with, like you said, it's just like, it's difficult to recreate masculinity in a way that, I don't know, it doesn't make people comfortable. It makes people uncomfortable to see people recreate it. But then also the dysphoria of my size was a very difficult thing that I don't know that I would have been able to manage had I not started medically transitioning as I started my journey into drag. So it hits. It's almost like you're forced into these very vulnerable spaces in yourself that you don't realize exist. So it like fast tracked my journey, where I was like super dysphoric. And obviously dysphoria is a lifetime thing with depending on what's going on. But as I started doing drag, I would put myself in these very vulnerable spaces where I'm like, I literally just, even before I got top surgery, took off my shirt and just had trans tape. And I'm like, oh God, I'm here. Like, this is great. Like, there's lights, there's like, there's no going back. But then you finish it and you're like, what did that mean for me? Like, what does that mean? And how did that make me feel? It's like, it's almost like you're able to kind of throw yourself into the wolves for a little bit and then come back and process and be like, what did that do for me?
I imagine there's something very powerful about surviving that. That like on the other side of it, you're like, well, if I can do that,
right,
then
what can I do?
Or I can survive people's like worst thoughts about me, because they've I've already subjected myself to their harshest criticisms.
Right.
Right.
And when you think about gender dysphoria, a lot of it has to do with what people's perception are of us. Because as trans folks, there's nothing wrong with how we're living, how we're feeling. It's really society that's wrong. It's society that doesn't understand. It's society that's been conditioned to feel uncomfortable about us. So gender dysphoria is about people's perception of us, right? For me, when I feel dysphoric, it's because I'm like, what are they thinking?
Yeah.
How am I being perceived? If society wasn't that way, we'd all be fine and dandy.
It would be different, that's for sure. Things would be different. Well, we ask everyone this question at the end of our time together. What does healing look like for transmasculine folks?
I think that healing is it's a heavy word.
It's a big question.
It's a heavy word.
Big question.
No, I think for me healing is just heavy because it's a lifetime process, right? And for transmasculine folks, I think it looks like being able to express all of ourselves, but especially and specifically the softer parts of ourselves, because I think I think society connects masculinity, which makes sense, connects masculinity to being parallel or being inherently dangerous. And it makes sense because we live in a patriarchal society, right? Cis men run a lot of the world. They run governments, the media. They run,
There's some truth to that stereotype.
Right. And so and look at the world we live in, right? It's fucking terrible. And so it makes sense that, people connect masculinity to that. But I think that as transmasculine folks, us being able to connect to that softness, to the parts of ourselves that are vulnerable, that are sweet, that are caring, that are loving, that are nurturing, that to me is what healing looks like for transmasc folks, because I don't know if there's any hope for masculinity. I think it's coming from transmasc folks, to be honest with you. I'm a little biased.
No, I think that there's something really powerful there. I mean, I think one of the reasons why I started doing the work that I do around masculinity is because I do believe that transmasculine folks and cis men have a lot to teach each other about surviving patriarchy. I'm also a little biased, and I think that transmasculine folks have maybe some more wisdom to share about that. Just having navigated sort of this duality of having walked through the world as women or as people perceived as women, and then walking through the world as someone perceived as a man or as a masculine person gives you a lot of perspective, right? And so I'm eager to get these ideas and these conversations that I think are happening a lot in queer spaces out into the world, so that other men and transmasculine folks can soak them up like sponges and maybe do a little bit of exploring and reflecting on the parts of their gender that maybe they're ready to transform or leave behind.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think that it's really important for us to have those conversations and hear them. Because I never had anything like that, anything represented that felt like, okay, this is, like I said, there's no blueprint. This is what I want to, this is the type of person I want to be. And so if we don't have these conversations, we'll get the information about masculinity from media, from cis men who are hurt, cis men who have not healed. And that's just a really dark and sad space to live in, because a lot of men don't have, or folks that are masculine don't have a way to express themselves and express things like sadness and
have been given some pretty terrible tools for expressing it or processing it.
And it's easier to go that path because that's how the world is set up. For us to show it in anger, for us to show it in ways that are harmful to folks around us. So
right on. Cool. Well, I would love it if we could end our time with a game. If you're down?
Yes, so down.
Okay,
so
great.
down. Let's go.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm going to pick up my little pile of paper here. Okay, so since you are constantly sort of taking inspiration from the sort of like classic heartthrob figure in pop culture, I thought we could do like a little versus game of celebrity short kings, like a one must go kind of situation.
Okay.
And you know, I'll say that we're using short very liberally here. I don't think any of these people are short. I'd probably give anything to be as tall as some of these people.
Yeah, like compared to us, everyone's tall.
Yeah, for real. But so we're using short and king in a very broad sense today.
Gotcha.
Okay, are you ready for your first one?
I'm ready.
Okay, all right. We've got Joe Jonas versus Nick Jonas.
Oh my gosh, this is so hard. So one must go.
One must go. You can only choose one. And I'm gonna give you some easy ones to start. So we're starting off easy.
This is easy.
This is easy.
Okay. I don't know enough about the Jonas Brothers, but I do know I like, what's his name? Not Nick.
One of them is Nick. One of them is
Nick.
Joe.
Nick. I like Nick's eyebrows more. So,
Okay, nice.
So Nick's gotta go.
Okay.
I'm sure people will hate that. I think.
Oh my God, I love that. I love that. Okay. Next, we've got Marcelo Hernandez and Punky Johnson, who are both comics on SNL. Punky's great. We love Punky.
Marcelo is
also. Oh my God! Wow! Okay.
Like,
all right. Very quick.
Look at the fit.
Okay. This one might be a little bit harder.
Okay.
We've got Chavela Vargas and Juan Gabriel. I know. I told you it was gonna be hard.
No. Oh my God. Okay. Our ancestors are gonna be rolling in the graves no matter what I say.
It's true. It's true. I know. I set you up for a haunting. I think.
I'm gonna be laying in bed like, did I make the right decision? Okay. So there's really no right answer here.
No.
But I have to give it to Chavela.
Nice.
I just have to.
Oh yeah.
I just have to. I love you, Juanga. I do a lot of Juanga too, so I'm like, you know what? I've given you my.
Yeah, you'll honor Juanga
I've honored
in other
you.
ways.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this is our last one. This is Julio Torres and Harvey Guillen. Two much beloved queer Latine actors, but you can only choose one.
Oh my, okay, these are so good.
Yeah.
These are so good. Yeah. They're both so funny, and I had not honestly made the connection that they're both queer and Latine. I just think they're just hilarious. Yeah. But I'm gonna have to choose.
Oh yes, great.
Has a new movie coming out or something? Or
Yes.
Yeah, I have to. Los Spookies just
yeah, I know.
Changed my life.
Yeah, okay. Well done. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Jay. It was incredible talking to you. I love like getting to uplift the work that you're doing and giving you the spotlight to kind of take it away and tell us a little bit about everything that you're creating and shaking up in Austin these days.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Honestly, these conversations always it feels like a breath of fresh air. And like I said, like folks being able to have these conversations and being able to watch them back, I think is so important and something that I'm sure our younger selves would have loved to have.
Yeah, I love hearing that. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We'll catch you on the next episode of Masculinity in Conversation. See you later.